A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Star Wars, Blade Squadron, Parts 1 and 2. By David J. Williams and Mark S. Williams, 2014. Published in 2 parts in Star Wars Insider number 149 and 150. This short story focuses on a squadron of B-wing starfighters on a suicide mission during the Battle of Endor. Created and read by the Archivist Publishing. Prologue. It is a troubling time for the rebellion. Following their disastrous defeat and subsequent loss of their base on the ice world of Hoth, the rebels had faced a string of losses against the forces of the Empire, including their recently established Echo Base. The loss of Echo Base, which was tasked with coordinating and positioning all of the rebellion's disparate units, forced Alliance High Command to divide its fleet into smaller, more nimble groups, none of which was now powerful enough to successfully face the Empire in a pitched battle. Given their small size and relative weakness as compared to the Imperial Navy fleets, these small rebel task forces were obligated to constantly evade Imperial forces by repeatedly jumping from one star system to another to avoid defeat at the hands of the Empire. Still, the aftermath of the Battle of Hoth demonstrated that the rebellion could escape and survive in this manner, almost indefinitely. As such, the Empire surmised that the key to destroying the rebellion lay not in discovering and attacking its gathering points, but instead luring it to a choke point from which it could not escape. However, the Battle of Yavin had shown that in order to force the rebels to stand their ground and fight, the Empire would need to present a threat so great that the rebels had no choice but to face it. Sometime following the Battle of Hoth, Crimson Dawn agents Bevelin and John Melton revealed the existence of the second Death Star to the Rebel Alliance. Then the Bothan Spynet managed to intercept information revealing that the Empire was building the new station in orbit over the forest moon of Endor and had occupied the moon in support of the Death Star project, thereby bringing Imperial forces into conflict with the native lifeforms. The Empire largely ignored the Ewoks, seeing them as annoyances instead of a threat, creating potential allies for rebel forces. Most importantly, the Bothan spies had learned that Galactic Emperor Palpatine was to personally oversee the completion of the Death Star. Based upon these intelligence reports, Rebel Command devised a plan whereby Alliance warships would engage the battle station's defenses, buying time for starfighters to enter the unfinished Death Star's superstructure to destroy its exposed reactor core. Prior to the arrival of the Alliance fleet, a strike team of commandos would be sent to the forest moon to destroy the deflector shield generator protecting the superweapon, utilizing the indigenous Ewoks, if possible, to achieve their objective. To ensure the element of surprise for the rebel attack, Leia Organa and a crew of rebels had placed hyper-transceivers in the Corva sector as a part of Operation Yellow Moon. These hyper-transceivers would act as decoys to attract Imperial attention to Organa, thereby deflecting the Empire's attention away from the rebel fleet gathering at Sullust. The operation was a success. In addition to placing the decoy hyper-transceivers, Organa and her team managed to steal a Lambda-class shuttle, which would prove essential for the infiltration mission on Endor's moon. As the rebellion continued to muster its forces, it introduced a new starfighter, the ASF-01 B-Wing Assault Starfighter, more commonly referred to as the B-Wing. It was primarily designed as a blockade buster to be utilized to attack and destroy large capital ships. As such, it was equipped with weaponry and systems normally reserved for much larger craft. Indeed, the B-Wing boasted more firepower than most patrol ships and corvettes. It was also capable of diverting power from all other systems into its energy weapons, unleashing enough firepower to vaporize a small mountain in one blast. At the same time, it was slower and less maneuverable than most comparable starfighters, gave off a significant infrared signature, and required more maintenance than any other Rebel starfighter in use. But utilized effectively, the B-Wing promised to be a versatile and effective tool against Imperial capital ships, including Imperial star destroyers. Unbeknownst to the Alliance, the Emperor, secretly the Sith Lord known as Darth Sidious, had foreseen the Alliance's plan and allowed the location of the second Death Star to be leaked and thereby set a trap, hoping to draw out the rebellion into a major battle in which the Rebel Alliance Navy could be crushed. To bait the trap, Imperial intelligence ensured the required information was leaked, but only allowed the Alliance to obtain an enticing yet incomplete set of information regarding the new Death Star. The Alliance was tricked into thinking that the battle station's super laser was inoperative when, in fact, the battle station would be fully operational. In addition to maintaining a skilled legion on Endor's surface to counter any Rebel ground assault, the Emperor would also hide a large fleet of star destroyers on the far side of Endor so as to entrap the Rebel fleet once they arrived. Ultimately, the Empire prepared itself to face the rebellion on battlefields under its complete control, with the potential threat of the Ewoks not something the regime even recognized as a danger. Furthermore, the Empire ensured that the rebels learned that Palpatine himself would be present, thereby making the second Death Star an irresistible target for the rebellion. In addition to wanting to personally oversee the last phase of the Death Star's construction and ensuring the Alliance would come in force by leaking his presence, Sidious decided that personally appearing at Endor would ensure a more complete victory for the Empire, and most importantly, he reasoned that the looming Battle of Endor would be the perfect place to turn Rebel hero and commander Luke Skywalker to the dark side of the Force. Fully confident of the outcome, and in spite of reports of the Rebel fleet massing near Sullust, the Emperor had his apprentice, Darth Vader, send the Imperial fleet protecting his project to the far side of Endor to await his orders. He also positioned Vader on board the command ship, Vader's own Executor-class Star Dreadnought Executor, which allowed Sidious to focus personally on turning Luke Skywalker to the dark side. Now, as Rebel forces continue to mass and the time of their attack draws near, squadrons of B-Wings continue to run final training exercises as they master the tactics required to effectively utilize this new class of starfighter in the upcoming battle. Part 1. Gina Moonsong popped her cockpit hatch and slid down the ladder onto the flight deck. She yanked off her flight helmet to reveal the red buzz cut she'd had ever since Dantooine, and wiped the sweat from her olive skin. Before she could hand off the flight log to the crew chief, the booming baritone of the deputy wing leader's voice echoed through the hangar.
"Front and center, cadet."
Moonsong froze and saluted, the ghost of a smile hovering just short of insubordination as Lieutenant Braylon Stram pushed his dark brown face right up to hers. He looked about as annoyed as any officer would who had just watched a vital training exercise go bust. all the more so when the order to advance on the Imperial fleet might come down any day.
What in the three suns did you think you were doing out there, Cadet?
Moonsong hesitated as pilots exited the ships all around her. The expressions on their faces ranged from annoyance. The outsider was causing trouble again, to professional interest. How was their by-the-book commander going to handle the latest infraction by the squadron's problem child? She met Stram's eyes and grinned.
Completing the mission successfully, sir.
Successfully? The computers say different. You were destroyed, along with half the squadron.
Sir, we scored 3 hits on the Star Destroyer, sir.
Except that wasn't a Star Destroyer. That was a bunch of drones in space simulating the position of a Star Destroyer. And you broke formation to score those hits, after which you got annihilated.
With due respect, sir, the calculations the wing leader sent in were off.
And after less than 50 hours, you're an expert at flying a B-wing. This isn't the same as smuggling off Coruscant, Cadet. When we go into battle, it won't be against some local security cruiser. We'll be facing the Imperial Navy.
Well, you'd know all about that, wouldn't you?
A moment of astonished silence. Then Stram drew in a deep breath to cite Moonsong for an inevitable disciplinary infraction. But before he could speak...
That's enough.
Wing Commander Adon Fox strode over to them both. Rotund and red-faced, he made up for his lack of warrior physique with reflexes and mental agility. He was known across the fleet as a first-rate leader of pilots. Yet right now, it was all he could do to keep them from killing each other.
I'm going to pretend the last 5 seconds never happened.
He said,
Because the cadet's right. My numbers were off.
Moonsong started to reply, but Fox cut her off.
But instead of hot-dogging in there, you should have told us what you were doing first.
Sir, I didn't have time.
Then make time.
He said it with such steel that Moonsong knew better than to question him.
The whole point of a B-wing squadron attack is that the combined ships act as a force multiplier. If we integrate our attack vectors, we have a far better chance of finishing the mission successfully and alive. Understood?
Yes, sir.
I don't think she understands at all.
Stram muttered.
She did get the job done, Lieutenant. Nobody ever said this war was going to be easy.
Fox turned back to a chastened Moonsong. His black eyes reminded her of her old mentor, Barthau Quince. They had that same look of disappointment that set a lump in her throat.
This is not your personal war, Cadet. If I thought it would do any good, I'd revoke your flight status right here and now, but frankly, we don't have enough pilots as it is.
He pitched his voice a little higher, letting it ring out across the hangar floor.
As it stands, I've just received our orders from Admiral Akbar. Tomorrow's the big show. The fleet moves on Endor. But we won't be participating in the main assault. We'll be safeguarding the fleet's lines of communications and guarding the rear.
Rear guard!
Moonsong couldn't hide her disappointment.
I didn't come all this way just to...
Enough, Cadet. We have our orders. Dismissed.
Fox turned on his heels and strode off the flight deck. He had mixed emotions that the squadron wouldn't be going into the kill zone. On the one hand, he longed to strike a blow at the Empire. But as much as he hated to admit it, the squadron just wasn't ready. And as for Stram, he meant well, but frankly, he was trying way too hard. Which was to be expected. Stram was a former Imperial naval officer who was used to strict discipline and the chain of command. What he needed to realize was that the Alliance did not have the same resources to train its pilots. Most of them had never flown a snub fighter before in their lives. Hell, most of the new flight cadets were from backwater worlds with little to no military experience. Case in point, one Gina Moonsong. Like so many others who flocked to the rebellion, she had no formal training and had learned to fly on smuggling routes off Coruscant. Moonsong might have a standing aversion to rules and regulations, but there was no denying she was an amazing pilot. Certainly better than himself, maybe almost as good as the legendary Wedge Antilles. Fox couldn't help but smile as he considered the true reason for the friction between the two pilots. They thought they had been so careful, but Fox was nothing if but perceptive, and had seen chemistry flare between them from the moment they first laid eyes on each other. Whether or not they had taken things any further than that, well, it was none of his business. Relationships with subordinates were unheard of in the Imperial Navy, but matters were a little more lenient in the midst of the rebellion, where there were no such restrictions beyond what wing commanders were willing to put up with. And not only did Fox have bigger things to worry about, he wasn't about to invoke a double standard. Everybody on the Squadron grapevine knew how generals were cavorting around with princesses, and if anything, the rebellion was the stronger for it. Illicit relationships in his squadron weren't Fox's problem. Training was. His people were still green, still scared. He'd been the same not too long ago. When the Battle of Hoth began, he'd had less than 100 hours of flight time, and yet they expected him to fly his single X-Wing as an escort to an escape transport. It looked like a suicide mission, but he'd somehow soldiered on and survived. What he hadn't counted on was his wife's transport being destroyed by the Star Destroyer blockade as it took off. But after that, Fox wasn't afraid anymore. He didn't feel much of anything these days, truth be told, and he was fine with that. He lay down on his bunk, knowing that there was no way he'd get any sleep before the operation tomorrow. He knew exactly where his dreams were liable to venture, and figured no dreams at all was better than dealing with ghosts of the past. Stram wasn't sleeping either. He'd brewed himself some coffee and settled down with schematics of B-Wings, X-Wings, TIE fighters, and Star Destroyers. Not to mention the original Death Star. He'd gone over all the accounts of the Battle of Yavin, focusing in particular on the ship logs of Antilles and Skywalker. They'd accomplished the impossible, but even they hadn't had to contend with capital ships guarding the station. Stram knew that this time around the Imperial Navy wouldn't be as lax, especially since the station was far from operational. He knew the Imperial logic, of course, knew it firsthand. They'd have at least a few Star Destroyers on hand, and would probably employ a lot of TIE fighters as long-range pickets. Admiral Akbar's plan of popping out of hyperspace as close to the Death Star as possible seemed like the only possible course of action, but the thought of doing so twisted Stram's stomach into knots. It wasn't death he feared, though. It was failure. His faith in the rebellion wasn't exactly boundless. He hadn't joined up because he thought they would win. It was just that he was tired of fighting for an oppressive force, of putting his boot on the throat of provincials whose only crime wasn't kowtowing quickly enough. It had been only a year since he deserted from his post in the Imperial garrison on Naboo and made his way into the Outer Rim to join the Alliance. He'd finally snapped, figuring it was better to die fighting tyranny than continuing to be its willing servant. And right now it looked like he was finally going to get his wish. The door chime broke his concentration. Stram was more than a little surprised when he opened it to find Moonsong standing there. Her emerald eyes seemed to almost glitter in the darkness. He took her by the arm, pulled her into his quarters.
Did anybody see you coming?
He asked.
Frankly, people have more important things to worry about.
Moonsong gestured at the schematics.
Doing a bit of last-minute studying, Lieutenant?
What do you want, Cadet?
For a moment, they stared at each other. Then,
I want to apologize.
she said.
That's a first?
For what I said in the hangar, I didn't mean to question your loyalty. I was mad and I was out of line.
Stram shrugged.
You were just stating a fact.
You know what I mean?
I came on a little heated too. It's only because...
Moonsong stepped forward and put her hand softly against his chest.
I know why.
Stram placed his hand over hers.
We're going to make it out of here.
Don't say things you don't mean.
What do you want me to say?
The truth.
The truth is none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow.
That made her laugh out loud.
What's so funny?
He demanded.
None of us know what's going to happen. That's precisely why we have a chance.
He grinned at that and drew her to him. Admiral Jared Montferrat was getting annoyed at all the screaming. It wasn't a noise one usually heard aboard the Devastator. His crew was the best there was, and they took a justified pride in their ship's unique legacy. And right now, that pride couldn't be greater. After months of raiding rebel commerce, the ship was rejoining Vader and his fleet at Endor. The final battle of the war might be in the offing, and that meant that there really wasn't time for distractions. So, when the Devastator happened to capture some suspected smugglers on the way into the system, Montferrat's orders were as simple as they were harsh, which meant there was a lot of screaming. Montferrat regarded the four shackled men with his single gray eye. He'd heard enough of their desperate protests about how they weren't rebel spies. Certainly, there was the faint possibility that they might be telling the truth about being traitors, but ultimately it made no difference. Montferrat had found over his many years of command that it was best to keep a crew focused on their mission. That was one of the many lessons he had learned back in the days when the Devastator served as Darth Vader's personal flagship. A focused crew was a crew less likely to make mistakes, and Montferrat believed in dealing with failures swiftly and definitively. So an opportunity to demonstrate the penalty for transgressions was always welcome. He gave the stormtroopers a curt nod. They slammed the airlock door, cutting off the screams. One of the smugglers began banging on the window, but Montferrat didn't bother to look. He hoped if his day ever came, he'd meet it with more dignity than the men he was dispatching. The stormtroopers cycled the airlock, and the banging stopped. The sergeant stepped forward.
What should we do with their ship, Admiral? Set it adrift and let the gun crews use it for target practice. Score the drill, and let me know if any gun crew fails to achieve 100%.
Without waiting for a response, Montferrat turned on his heels and headed back toward the command deck. He took the long way there, of course. He always walked the decks before a big operation. He liked to let the officers and crew know that he was watching their every move. That was one more thing Lord Vader had taught him. Truth to tell, he didn't expect much in the way of action in the upcoming operation. There was no way the surprised rebels would be able to withstand the awesome display of power the Emperor had amassed to put an end to their seditious nonsense once and for all. Even so, his analytical mind had gone over the mission details time and time again, and he intended to carry them out to the letter. Montferrat arrived on the bridge to find Commander Grad wearing his immaculate flight suit. There was no question that Grad was one of the best TIE fighter pilots in the whole fleet. But Montferrat found his ostentatious nature to be a continual source of annoyance. He cleared his throat.
Commander, I want you to take your interceptors out and take up position aft of the ship.
Grad cocked an eyebrow and ran a finger over his pencil-thin mustache.
I thought we were going to support the battle station's operations, Admiral.
You are. Only now you will be doing it closer to this vessel when we move to engage the rebel fleet.
Sir, may I suggest...
You may not. Considering that even the smallest of their attack craft have hyperdrives, I don't want to be taken by surprise by any snub fighter attacks, and I want to be free to maneuver against their capital ships as soon as we have the go-ahead.
Grad bowed slightly and gave Montferrat a crooked smile.
A sensible alteration to the plan, sir. Allow me to compliment...
Spare me, Commander. After the battle is won, I'm sure there will be time enough for appropriate congratulations. Dismissed.
The fighter ace headed toward the bridge exit. Somehow his ego wasn't too large for him to get through the door. But in his wake, Montferrat was quietly seething. No one would have dared question Vader's orders when he was running the ship. Montferrat could testify personally to that, having seen Vader force choke more than one hapless Imperial officer in front of his own eyes. Montferrat had lived in daily fear of that deadly grip when he was subordinate to Vader on board the Devastator, and had, though he would never have admitted it to himself, been more than a little relieved when Vader transferred his flag to the Executor. Not that Vader needed to be on the same ship to exact punishment, and anyway, the Executor was visible on the screens right now. An impossibly vast vessel, the Star Destroyers arrayed around it like minnows to a shark. Looking at the new flagship, Montferrat half wished that Vader had taken him as an officer to serve on the Executor's bridge. But he knew such thoughts were foolish. Montferrat was caretaker of a vital legacy, a sacred trust. The Devastator had witnessed historic battles. It had served on the blockade at Hoth, and it had even once captured Princess Leia Organa. Who knows, maybe it would have another chance against her in the coming battle. The ship had been refitted dozens of times with the latest systems and weapons, keeping her more than competitive with the newer capital ships now operational. The Devastator thus remained one of the most prestigious commands in the fleet. Montferrat would have been the first to say that he was lucky to be where he was, but it was well known to all who served under him that the Admiral firmly believed there was no such animal as luck. He looked up from his reverie to see an excited bridge officer gesturing at a tactical display.
Admiral, the rebel fleet just emerged from hyperspace.
Shock was far too mild a word for what the rebel fleet experienced as it realized the partially completed Death Star's shields were up. But even more alarming was the fact that they were effectively cut off by the largest flotilla of Star Destroyers ever assembled. A mass of ships stretching across the sky. They were trapped. Fox let out a low curse as his A-Wing's comm filled with the urgent voices of the other wing commanders asking for instructions. He took in the situation. The main rebel strike force, led by General Lando Calrissian in the Millennium Falcon, had broken off its attack on the battle station and was slugging it out with swarms of TIE fighters dispatched from the Imperial fleet. Behind them, Star Destroyers were moving in for the kill. Fox's tactical display looked like a multi-layered spider web of electromagnetic interference. He wasn't surprised at all when he got orders canceling the rear guard mission and reassigning his wing. Pronto.
About time,
said Moonsong.
Stow that talk, Blade 3.
Snapped Stram. Moonsong shut up as Fox spat out the new orders. There was no time to tell them the why of the situation. It wasn't their job to think. In fact, the less thinking they did at this point, the better. But on the off chance that the rebel commandos who had landed on the moon somehow brought the shield down, the fleet was going to need to pivot quickly and vector onto the Death Star. They were going to have to make every second count. And they weren't going to have time to fight their way through still more Star Destroyers. One in particular was deploying just in front of the shield. Fox recognized it as the Devastator. The ship that Vader had once commanded. The ship that had killed his family. He gritted his teeth and keyed his mic.
Blade Leader to Blade Squadron. Follow me in on heading 170 Delta.
Blade Squadron broke apart. Then reformed like a flock of birds streaking towards the huge ship in an arrowhead formation. But any hope Fox had for a quick strike against the massive ship disappeared as 24 TIE interceptors swept in from the ship's aft and came at them head to head. Fox watched them rush in on the screens with a sinking feeling. He knew in his heart of hearts that most of his pilots had just barely grasped the techniques needed to make attack runs on a capital ship. And now they were going to have to dogfight for their lives with seasoned TIE fighters. Yet the situation here was the same as everywhere else in the fleet. They were surrounded. It was over. But it wasn't. Fox cracked a smile. They might not be able to win, but at the least they would give the Imperials a fight they would never forget.
Blade Squadron, start your attack run.
Part 2. It had all been leading up to this moment. Gina Moonsong could see that now. Could see how all the paths and permutations of her life had led inexorably to this place. Somewhere in space near Endor. An absolutely insignificant moon, which was now, thanks to the Empire's decision to build its battle station there, the most important place in the galaxy. All her time as a smuggler back on Coruscant, all her resolution to stay one step ahead of the law and never to get involved. Well, it hadn't worked. She'd gotten involved and then some. And now there was no turning back. Moonsong had seen her share of security and police cruisers, had either flown in or run from virtually every type of ship out there. But she'd never seen an actual Star Destroyer before. Sure, she'd watched a million holos, participated in endless training runs, studied schematics till her eyes glazed over. But this was different. This was a monstrous slab of metal covered with guns and armor, crewed by enough men to fill a city. The kind of ship other craft never went near if they wanted to live to see another landfall. Every instinct in Moonsong was screaming at her to turn her B-wing around and flee. But somehow, she controlled her nerves and held her course, accelerating in toward the Devastator. For the first time since she had joined the rebellion, she realized the true magnitude of her situation. The fun and games were over. All that was left was to die bravely. She pulled into formation behind Blade Leader. rotated her ship's wing 30 degrees around the gyro-stabilized cockpit in which he sat. Moonsong's wingman Blade 4 executed the same maneuver as he brought up the rear. She didn't need to check her scanners to know Lieutenant Braylon Stram and his wingman were matching her course and speed. All the fumbled training missions and mishaps were forgotten. The real thing was underway, and the squadron was rising to the moment, finally working together as a single, seamless unit. The ships resembled some great avian flock as they fell into attack formation. On Moonsong's tactical display, the Devastator was a huge, spinning ball of electronic countermeasures, punctuated by an outgoing hail of laser cannon fire. As the ships accelerated towards the behemoth, Moonsong could feel her craft's S-foils buckling as she struggled to keep on course while hits from the Devastator's laser cannons drained her deflector shield power and rocked the ship. Unfortunately, there were few real options for getting close to a Star Destroyer, except to go straight at it. But at the moment, incoming fire was the least of Moonsong's worries. They were approaching far too fast for the ship's gunners to lock onto. And even then, it would take several direct hits to knock out one of the B-wings. She was just starting to think they might make it all the way to the Star Destroyer itself when...
Stay in formation, people. Interceptors incoming.
Wing Commander Fox's voice echoed through her headset as a squadron of TIE interceptors poured around the Star Destroyer and rushed in toward her. They must have been in a holding pattern immediately aft of the ship, but now they were deploying in earnest against the B-wing menace. On paper, the mismatch was considerable. B-wings were assault fighters that maneuvered like freighters, stuffed as they were with avionics packages usually reserved for the smaller capital ships. Pilots relied on the complex nav systems to enable them to score hits. But in a ship-to-ship dogfight, the B-wing was at a considerable disadvantage even with the A-wings that were flying escort. All they could do was accelerate toward the target, hoping that at least some of them would get close enough to deliver their payloads. Moonsong watched as the TIE fighters broke formation and swept past them, executing seamless loops that put them on the squadron's tail, opening up a withering blast of fire all around the B-wings. Admiral Montferrat could not believe the audacity of these rebel scum.
Didn't they realize they were facing the Devastator? This was Vader's one-time flagship, the Pride of Death Squadron.
Montferrat prided himself on having the best-trained crew in the entire Imperial Navy. Ever since he had taken command of her at the Battle of Hoth, Montferrat had personally and ruthlessly combed the ranks, recruiting and promoting only those officers and ratings who had met his meticulous and exacting standards. And even though he found TIE Fighter Commander Grad personally distasteful, There was no doubt that his skills as a fighter ace were almost on a par with Darth Vader himself. Montferrat watched the engagement unfold on the Devastator's giant tactical display. Several rebel ships had been destroyed already. The remainder were taking heavy fire from the TIE interceptors. At this point, most sane pilots would have broken off their attack to deal with their pursuers. But the rebels waited until they were deep within the Devastator's flak envelope before executing their own high-speed turns, ensuring the ensuing dogfight would occur in uncomfortably close proximity to the monolithic ship. And the irrational human factor didn't stop there. Montferrat watched as a single B-wing fighter spiraled back, directly into the heart of Grad's squadron. The pilot knew full well what he was doing, buying time for his comrades. One surprised TIE pilot died in a hail of laser fire from the B-wing's quad cannons before he even knew what had hit him. The rebel pilot then abruptly cut his speed, allowing 2 TIE interceptors to pass, which he then lacerated with pinpoint shots from his craft's ion cannons. He might have been able to score a 4th kill had Grad not threaded the needle of fire and blown the B-wing to pieces. Montferrat rounded in fury on one of his gunnery officers, who had continued to shoot into the dogfight, hitting one of the B-wings, but just missing 2 of the TIE interceptors.
Cease fire, you fool! You'll hit our own pilots!
The blood drained from the gunnery officer's face. He stopped firing as Montferrat turned back to the tactical display, absorbing the fleet positions of the larger battle raging all around. Commander Grad couldn't help but grin as he zeroed in on another B-wing. Panicked, the rebel pilot attempted erratic, evasive maneuvers. Grad's smile intensified as he fell in behind him and blew out the starfighter's quad-engine system with a single shot. He didn't even bother looking at the snub fighter disintegrate as he sped past. There was no question in Grad's mind that rebel pilots were mostly inferior, if not just outright incompetent. He'd heard a lot of talk about the B-wing before this battle, how they posed an unprecedented danger to star destroyers if they could get enough maneuvering room to deploy their weaponry. But Grad had no intention of giving them that room. Not that it would matter anyway. Regardless of B-wing specifications, Grad had always placed far more faith in the man than the machine. Though he would have been the first to admit that Maxim was double-edged, it chafed him to no end that the most famous pilot in the galaxy was a 20-something farm boy who had somehow managed to blow up the first Death Star. But sometimes luck was a fickle mistress. Unfortunately, Grad's secret hopes of cutting Skywalker's legend down to size in a glorious ship-to-ship encounter had been dashed when he heard that the Emperor himself had sent Darth Vader to bring the boy to him alive. Grad would just have to make up for the lost opportunity by killing as many rebel pilots as he could. He could tell that whoever was running the rebel wing of pilots had some combat experience. That was going to make the kill all the more satisfying. He checked his scanner, searching for the fighter receiving the most comm traffic. It was an old trick he used to find the enemy wing leader. The tactic didn't fail him. One of the escort A-wings lit up, and Grad locked him into his targeting computer.
Break! Break! Break!
Fox yelled into his comlink. Blade's squadron broke formation several thousand meters above the Devastator's topside and went ship to ship. An angry swarm of TIE interceptors, A-wings and B-wings, buzzing around the gigantic vessel. It only took a few seconds for things to go from bad to worse. Fox's long-range scanners picked up a huge electromagnetic buildup around the new Death Star. Before he could even ponder what the station was doing, a bright beam of green light leapt from its radial cannon and incinerated an entire Rebel cruiser. The station was operational. Admiral Akbar and General Calrissian's voices echoed over the fleet-wide comm, ordering the Rebel fleet to engage the Imperial Star Destroyers.
All fighters, close to point-blank range. I'd get on top of them.
But Fox had more immediate problems at hand, with no less than 3 interceptors on his tail and 2 more coming for him over the bubble's horizon. They had identified him as the leader and were going to try to shut him down hard. Fox dialed back his speed, spoiling the shots of the interceptors on his tail. One veered past him at high speed, forcing the ships on that vector to swerve off to avoid a collision. As the starfighter overshot, Fox's wingman, Blade 1, managed to get off a bracket of fire, knocking one of the delta-shaped wings clean off, causing it to spin out of control and smash into another interceptor. But Blade 1's triumph was short-lived, as 2 of the interceptors caught him in a crossfire, opening up so quickly that he probably never even knew what hit him. The remaining interceptor matched Fox's speed, staying on him despite Fox's weaving flight pattern. Fox gritted his teeth and leaned forward.
Okay, fella, so you want to play?
He muttered.
Let's see how good you really are.
And promptly swerved hard, taking the ship through a dizzying set of maneuvers. But the interceptor matched them, moving ever closer, filling Fox's display with the ominous gray shadow of his foe. His sensors showed its forward lasers charging for the killing shot. Grad smiled as his targeting computer locked onto the A-wing. The board lit up green as Grad unleashed a barrage of fire from the interceptor's laser cannons, at first cascading off the A-wing's heavy shielding, but quickly punching through. Parts of the Rebel ship began to burn. Grad was astonished at the amount of damage his quarry was taking while still remaining operational. And even now, it took all of Grad's concentration to keep up with the Rebel pilot's evasive maneuvering. Back in the early days of the rebellion, Grad had once been impressed by these intuitive upstart fighter pilots, making up for skill with sheer audacity and will. Now he'd killed far too many of them to give any credit to their unorthodox piloting. Which is why what happened next took him so completely by surprise. At the last possible second, Fox flipped his A-wing over, yanking back on the stick and executing a high G-force barrel roll under the attacking interceptor.
Now you're mine.
The Imperial pilot gave up the advantage of pursuit so he could take a final shot, which, much to the TIE interceptor's surprise, did not result in a killing shot. He most likely died wondering why that was, as Fox came out of the roll behind him and blew him to pieces.
Blade leader to group. If you make it past the fighter screen, execute your primary mission. Over and out. Break! Break! Break!
Fox yelled into his comlink. Blade Squadron broke formation several thousand meters above the Devastator's topside and went ship to ship. An angry swarm of TIE interceptors, A-wings and B-wings, buzzing around the gigantic vessel. It only took a few seconds for things to go from bad to worse. Fox's long-range scanners picked up a huge electromagnetic buildup around the new Death Star. Before he could even ponder what the station was doing, a bright beam of green light leapt from its radial cannon and incinerated an entire rebel cruiser. The station was operational. Admiral Akbar and General Calrissian's voices echoed over the fleet-wide comm, ordering the rebel fleet to engage the Imperial star destroyers.
All fighters, close to point-blank range. I'd get on top of them.
But Fox had more immediate problems at hand, with no less than 3 interceptors on his tail and 2 more coming for him over the bubble's horizon. They had identified him as the leader and were going to try to shut him down hard. Fox dialed back his speed, spoiling the shots of the interceptors on his tail. One veered past him at high speed, forcing the ships on that vector to swerve off to avoid a collision. As the starfighter overshot, Fox's wingman, Blade 1, managed to get off a bracket of fire, knocking one of the delta-shaped wings clean off, causing it to spin out of control and smash into another interceptor. But Blade 1's triumph was short-lived, as 2 of the interceptors caught him in a crossfire, opening up so quickly that he probably never even knew what hit him. The remaining interceptor matched Fox's speed, staying on him despite Fox's weaving flight pattern. Fox gritted his teeth and leaned forward.
Okay, fella, so you want to play?
He muttered.
Let's see how good you really are.
And promptly swerved hard, taking the ship through a dizzying set of maneuvers. But the interceptor matched them, moving ever closer, filling Fox's display with the ominous gray shadow of his foe. His sensors showed its forward lasers charging for the killing shot. Grad smiled as his targeting computer locked onto the A-wing. The board lit up green as Grad unleashed a barrage of fire from the interceptor's laser cannons. at first cascading off the A-Wing's heavy shielding, but quickly punching through. Parts of the rebel ship began to burn. Grad was astonished at the amount of damage his quarry was taking while still remaining operational. And even now, it took all of Grad's concentration to keep up with the rebel pilot's evasive maneuvering. Back in the early days of the rebellion, Grad had once been impressed by these intuitive upstart fighter pilots. Making up for skill with sheer audacity and will. Now he'd killed far too many of them to give any credit to their unorthodox piloting. Which is why what happened next took him so completely by surprise. At the last possible second, Fox flipped his A-Wing over, yanking back on the stick and executing a high G-force barrel roll under the attacking interceptor.
Now you're mine.
The Imperial pilot gave up the advantage of pursuit so he could take a final shot. Scoring a direct hit on the A-Wing's drive systems, which, much to the TIE interceptor's surprise, did not result in a killing shot. He most likely died wondering why that was, as Fox came out of the roll behind him and blew him to pieces. But Fox had no time to savor his triumph. His vision flared red from all the emergency lights in his cockpit, and he became dimly aware that he was choking back blood. He opened up the comm channel.
Blade leader to group. If you make it past the fighter screen, execute your primary mission. Over and out.
Stram saw Blade Leader's ship spiral off from the attack, obviously fighting to maintain control.
So much for Fox,
he thought. There wasn't time to think about whether their leader would survive. It was just one more factor in the chaos of the battle as he attempted to mobilize an attack run amidst the dogfight. But the hysterical yelling in his headset wasn't helping.
Too many TIE fighters. We've got to get out of here.
That's a negative, Blade 4.
Said Stram.
Keep the comms clear of chatter.
His attack computer told him Blade 3 and 4 were with him inside the destroyer's defense envelope. And he knew the ships would be syncing their fire control systems, automatically coordinating a single attack package of laser fire and proton munitions.
I know you've got the attack data ready. Confirm, Blade 3.
I'm working as fast as I can,
said Moonsong. She was facing considerable distraction. Despite the death of their wing commander, the TIE interceptors were redoubling the fury of their attack. She could see their glittering lights as they maneuvered to get behind the rebel fighters. Then Stram broke off from the attack formation and swung his craft around to face the fighters on their tail.
Get that attack data. I'll hold them off.
Moonsong bit her lip. She couldn't worry about Stram. He knew what he was doing. She hoped. It was a fitting place for the rebellion to end. And yet, despite his satisfaction, Montferrat felt shame that his own part in this had been so less than perfect. He could only marvel at the level of incompetence Grad had displayed. Not only had his arrogance gotten him killed, it had actually increased the previously minuscule threat the rebel fighters posed for the Devastator. But he wasn't worried. Not yet, anyway.
Fighter control report.
An ashen-faced junior officer stepped forward.
The rebels are down to less than half a dozen ships, sir. And our fighter screen?
We've sustained major damage to our flight deck and cannot launch or recover any more interceptors. Should I signal to another ship for fighter support?
Montferrat gave the officer an icy stare.
Everyone else is a little busy. Set all weapon batteries for point-blank range and fire at will.
Moonsong had a plan. It wasn't much of one, but it was the best her ship's computer could do given the timing. Her nav systems lined up the angles, finding the pathway through the Devastator's electronic defense grid. She rapidly typed in the new attack vector and hit the transmit, while simultaneously lining up the crosshairs projected onto her helmet's heads-up display. Her board went green, indicating that Blade 2 and 4 had received the data. But then it suddenly flashed back to yellow. Blade 4's targeting system must have been damaged and wouldn't lock on.
Reset your targeting computer, Fanti.
Moonsong barked into her comm.
No can do. The whole system's crashed. You go in without me.
Moonsong's scanners showed a TIE interceptor vectoring in to target Blade 4 as he peeled out of formation. Moonsong cursed under her breath. There was nothing she could do. The pair of TIE interceptors on her tail would have their firing solutions in a matter of seconds. Moonsong fully expected the next shots to end her short career as a rebel pilot. But instead, both interceptors blew up as Blade 2 swept in behind them and took them out with clean, precise shots that only an expert could have pulled off. The blasts they'd just unleashed ripped past Moonsong, missing her and striking the Star Destroyer, impacting harmlessly against its armor. Moonsong knew better than to waste time thanking Stram. Instead, she locked flight paths with him. They both pulled back on their throttles. Rotating their wings through a 180, and bringing their ion cannons to bear, unleashing their proton torpedoes and scoring direct hits on the weak points in the Devastator's navigational shielding. The ship's hyperdrive detonated, causing a chain reaction of explosions which blew back into the Star Destroyer's primary generators. Montferrat pulled out his pistol and shot the panicking officer. So much for insubordination. As klaxons blared and warning lights flashed all around him, Montferrat made his way across the burning bridge to an engineering station and shoved the dead officer who had manned it out of the way so he could see why the drive section had stopped responding to his frantic queries for more power. The answer was as simple as it was definitive. An ion overload had destroyed the cooling manifolds and ruptured the hyperdrive's magnetic containment bubble, which meant that everybody down in the power plant was either dead or dying, and the ship was undergoing systematic demolition.
Sir!
Screamed a badly burned officer.
The Death Star's shield is down!
Montferrat looked around at the dying screens. The whole moment seemed like a dream. How was this possible? How had the mightiest Space Force ever assembled been bested by a bunch of misfits, rejects, and malcontents? He took a last look around the bridge as he slowly pulled off his black gloves and laid them down on the shattered console. He could feel the floor plates shudder, and for a moment he seemed to rise into the air as the craft's artificial gravity flickered out. He felt light as a feather, and for some unknown reason, the sensation seemed right and proper. As Moonsong and Stram's B-Wings accelerated to maximum speed, the Devastator burnt in their wake. Stram opened up the comm channel.
Blade 2 to Admiral Akbar. The course is clear. Tell General Calrissian he's got nothing but empty space all the way to the Death Star.
Acknowledged, Blade 2. Good work.
Stram switched frequencies back to the squadron.
Blade 2 to all surviving units, form up on me. This fight isn't over yet.
But all Moonsong could hear was the echo of static. Static that had never made her feel more hollow.
Blade 4 here.
Fanty's battered ship pulled into formation.
I think we're the only survivors.
Not quite,
said a voice. Moonsong and Stram looked up to see Fox's A-Wing angling toward them. Even as they took that in, the Devastator started to explode behind it, lighting up the ships. A tiny daytime star in the skies over Endor. But Moonsong's elation quickly faded as her sensors told her Fox's ship was experiencing multiple critical systems failures.
Eject, Blade Leader,
she said.
We'll recover your pod. Get out of there now!
But Fox's voice was resigned to the inevitable.
I already tried. The main interlocks are fused. They won't let me disengage.
Hold course. I'll intercept
That's a negative, Moonsong. Regroup and form up to assist the fleet. Nobody's called off the war on my account.
Moonsong hesitated.
You heard the man,
said Stram.
Was his voice breaking?
She thought. Moonsong couldn't tell. She steeled herself, locked course with Stram and Fanty. The 3 B-Wings veered off toward the rest of the rebel fleet. The fight was now raging all around the Death Star. The shield was down and rebel fighter wings were calling for help as they barreled in to attack the unfinished station. There were still a number of star destroyers trying to stem the seemingly endless tide of rebel interceptors. Moonsong watched as Fox's ship faded on her rear screens. Ahead lay the Death Star. This audiobook was developed 100% using artificial intelligence. to generate realistic and familiar voices.